This is Tipping Point Radio, and you're listening to The 42 Show. In this episode, we're asking, do we need art? With the world falling into violent chaos around us, should we take the time to create art in our lives? Is there still a place for art in the 21st century? How is art defined? Is there such a thing as accidental art? Does it have to be dangerous to be art? We make chairs, houses, and textiles as art, so can we make life art? Plus, who are the true artists? The Marx Brothers or the Three Stooges? Today we're talking rappers, Zen monks, idiots in the Grand Canyon, and other artists. All this and more, as three guys pursue the answers to life, the universe, and everything. Hello everyone, this is Craig Merriweather in the 42 Show. I'm here with Morgan Boatman and Brad Olson. So today we're talking about art, and I'm going to let Morgan introduce the topic.
Okay, well, we live our lives in a very practical manner, or at least focused on the practical day to day, and that definition usually excludes all kinds of things, Our time is relegated to things that produce money or produce products or somehow, somehow benefit us in some concrete way. But there's a whole aspect of human existence that is, at least in my life, relegated to, the bottom of the list. I don't think it used to be that way. I think it's easy for a man to forget about aesthetics and what makes life worth living, the beauty and the things that appeal to a different aspect of our being that is not authorized by what we're supposed to be doing. Clearly there's a short list of what we're, as men, supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be making money. We're supposed to be, caring for our families and doing things that produce and being good citizens. But I've found that without concerted effort, art, in a general sense, is left out of my life. Now, whether art is going out and walking in the forest, or going to an actual gallery, or creating something that you consider art, I leave that to the individual. But my idea is that you have to make an effort to include really the quintessential component of being a human being. We've seen it. Any beast of burden can create or put effort toward creating a product or something that's valuable toward production. But only humans and elephants, apparently, can appreciate and make art.
Okay, well, you mentioned going off into nature, so I want to kind of define what we're talking about to maybe we can break that up into two parts. Because when I was listening to you, the first thing that came into my mind was the difference between three of us here in America and, say, Europe or China, which has a rich history of art. And in America, while of course we do have an art culture, it doesn't seem to be that steeped into our consciousness or into our lives. And I'm just wondering if it's because America, in terms of Europeans moving to America, is so young, less than 300 years old, that we still don't have, and we're so divided amongst so many different cultures now, that we can't have that experience together, that art experience together. And if we as a culture never really had the time to pursue art because we're always in survival mode. We first move here, we're trying just to survive the winters and figure out how to grow crops, and then we move west, and then the industrial age starts, and then World War I, World War II, and all this stuff is going on, and we're just trying to find our place in the world. Time is moving so fast in terms of, just my great-grandmother passed away 1996. She was 103, and just the transformation in her lifetime from being born in 105, so I can't remember, but it was 1893 to when she passed away. Just the massive amount of changes that went on in that 100 years, from cars to plane flights to walking on the moon to computers and all that. So as that moves on, do we even have time to create and sit and contemplate art?
More than any other place, more than any other culture, more than any other time, the United States and men living now need art.
I didn't say we didn't need it. I just say we don't pursue it. And I wonder if we don't pursue it because we're constantly in survival mode.
I don't think it's a question of not pursuing it. I think it's always pursued. It's always been pursued. And maybe in times where survival is even more in jeopardy than at other times, the great art is produced. You think about the period in between the two world wars. This was a revolution in art. Modernism, Picasso, Frida Kahlo, all over the world too, producing amazing art. And it always is produced. I don't think that's the reason why. I think the argument can be made, do we have great art now? I don't know, maybe not. And if we don't, it's because we want to monetize it. It's not because it's not being produced. But we want it to be commercial. And if something's commercial, it appeals to a sensibility that doesn't necessarily care about quote-unquote great art, whatever that is. And I have some ideas about what that is, but we might get to that later. But I think it's always been produced, and I think at times of political upheaval, at times where people are starving, people dying in the streets, great art is produced, and not just visual art, but literature and poetry, and all that kind of expansive experience of the world, is art.
I think the cultures that you mentioned, Craig, I think the plethora of cultures that come together in the United States makes it a unique nursery for art. We see art and creativity here in the United States that you can't imagine in other countries. It's a place to come together and create new things, and new forms of
the United States as a whole does not embrace it. Now, are we defining art through all the spectrum?
Does not embrace art. That's a big problem.
Yes,
that's a big problem personally and socially.
Now, are we including music, film, poetry, literature, everything? Okay, so certainly things, especially in the 60s and 70s, film was a huge. I think the new medium people wanted to play with and experiment with, and people were throwing money at it. I don't think it's that way at the moment.
No, I don't think.
I'm sure you could still find.
I don't think there's much artistic work coming out of cinema.
Now it's so cheap to get a decent camera and software on your computer. You can make your own movies. So I'm sure there's people out there doing that. It's just, how do you find it nowadays? There's so many sites where you can go to.
Well, as a filmmaker or former filmmaker, I can say it's much easier now to produce and distribute your independent film than it ever has been. And this is a good thing. The cheap cameras and the inexpensive software and the ease at which creativity is expressed is a good thing.
Yeah.
But let's say the attention to being deeply creative, so expressing your innermost feelings, is what's being overwhelmed by what Brad mentioned, the monetization of it. And I can speak very personally about this. I have made my living through the years at being creative as a producer, as a film and video producer, as a three-dimensional computer artist, as various other hats I've worn, but I've never considered myself an artist. And I think that in many ways has been my, sort of the lament of my life, is that I've brought my creativity to a medium, but only because it could make me money. And I could do both things. I could be a productive citizen and father and husband and do it creatively.
So, do you believe that an artist must struggle and suffer in order to be an artist?
I think life is suffering and struggling. I don't think that automatically makes us artists. I think an artist needs to tap and express his life intention without having a view to what someone else is going to say about it for that person to write a check for him.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that art is something that I think one works at it. I also think it's something that arises more or less organically. I don't think that it answers to any particular plan, or expectation. And what makes art is, I suppose, the experience that the viewer has upon encountering it. You mentioned an aesthetic earlier, and I think there is an aesthetic experience that happens, an experience of beauty, which coincidentally enough, we hadn't talked about this topic beforehand, but in my practice as a psychoanalyst, I'm more convinced than ever at this point that it's an experience of beauty that allows people to change, as opposed to all reams of research papers and data and all that stuff, or persuasion. It's really this aesthetic experience that changes people. And in the consulting room, the idea is to create that aesthetic experience around an individual's life. And so the life itself becomes art.
See the beauty in your own life.
Yeah.
That goes back to why I mentioned nature, is because there's nothing, I think, there's nothing more beautiful and more harmonious with, well, in this case, human, than nature. And I think all art strives to recreate or to inspire that deep beauty that we feel and that can be felt in nature. Some people are, maybe they're not nature type people. They don't want to go out and walk around the forest, but they will go to a gallery and have a similar feeling to what someone comfortable in nature might feel relating to a work.
Art in the past was more the rich family's domain. Their patrons, they funded the symphony, they funded the opera, they funded the artist, and sometimes 20 years to get an artist to where they needed to be. In the United States, while there's certainly that patron culture around, it's not as prevalent, and the government has more or less kind of funded the arts, the National Endowment of the Arts, and getting money for museums and things like that. And of course, there's still the tax write-offs. Funding an opera is a charitable activity. You can get a tax write-off. So there's even that involvement for government. And yet we're cutting the art programs from schools, cutting music programs.
Yeah, it's a terrible mistake. What do we do? We're creating a nation of, accountants and bankers and lawyers.
Well, we're training people to work.
That's a pretty bleak and I think short-sighted notion.
Here's the thing: is we seem to have no money for art and music program, but all the money you want for the football, baseball, track programs.
Not to mention war.
Not to mention war. Well,
particularly.
Yeah, and so I remember vividly. I think it was the mid '80s when that art project Mapplethorpe.
Oh yeah,
I'm thinking
Mapplethorpe. Yeah, Robert Mapplethorpe.
Was he the one who did the
Piss Christ? Yeah.
Or the crucifix in the jar of urine that the National Endowment of the Arts funded, and a lot of people got upset by that, and rightfully so. And should the government be funding something that offends somebody's personal religion? You know, you have the right to say whatever you want and make whatever kind of art you want. That doesn't mean I have to pay for it, was the kind of thing I was getting from that. And it's like, so then it goes back, well then the government can't fund art, and most of the money is going to football programs.
Well, I
for
think that's
schools.
kind of a bullshit argument, though. It's not that we're funding any particular artist or any particular kind of art. We're funding the idea of art. And I think that's more important than you know, any particular artist or whatever he produces in the debate about whether or not it's art. There is such a thing as didactic art, and I think that Mapplethorpe's Piss Christ is probably in that category rather than aesthetic art. Didactic art inspires a conversation, and in that sense, it's necessary. It's useful. You know, James Joyce so here I go back into the 20s, but James Joyce in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, he talks about what art is, as opposed to pornography. And Joyce said that pornography is anything that inspires in the viewer a desire to possess it. And art, this true aesthetic, gives you a seizure of the heart, he said. So this is a sense of that aesthetic, you know, being overwhelmed by that aesthetic sensibility of beauty, or even as, you know, we could call it the sublime. So the idea that this piece of art is bad and we shouldn't fund this artist, I think is wrong-headed, because it's really not about the artist or the work. It's about the idea of art that we're funding. And that needs to be a focus, as opposed to, you know, debating the merits of particular artists and are we going to fund this, and is this art, is this not art? Public art installations are always controversial. We're in Flagstaff, Arizona, for those of you listening who don't know us, and in Phoenix, you know, a decade ago or so, or maybe longer, maybe two, there was all this controversy over the public art installations along one of the freeways. And they were reminiscent of, you know, Native American pottery and things like that, and cracked and broken and all this kind of stuff. And there was a number of people who just absolutely hated them. And I wasn't particularly moved by them, but I didn't dislike them. But I really liked the fact that they were there. That somebody thought about putting something along this ugly freeway that would somehow, like, make me think for a moment. It would take me out of my domestic experience, right? And make me wonder about it positively or negatively. And I think that's the value of art, is that it moves us out of the mundane, prosaic experience. And this idea that you guys are skirting around a little bit, maybe, that nature itself is art. And do we see nature as art? Or do we see nature as, you know, a place?
I think most people don't even see nature. They're living in big cities. You know, and
Well, you don't have to live in a big city to not see nature. I think that,
you live in New York, I mean, other than if you can get over to Central Park.
but there are people who live here that don't see nature too. I think that the idea of art is very important here. We live in a very rational society where everything has to have one meaning. Everything has to have a definition. What do we do when we don't know something? We look it up in a dictionary or an encyclopedia or Wikipedia. We find out, oh, this is what somebody says this means. Art is essentially a question. It's bringing a question to you. It's forcing a question into your mind, into your heart. And nature does that because nature is out of our control. It's defining itself. It's defining itself by not defining itself. It's ever changing. It's always a question. People have a tendency today, and this may be why the young America is wrestling with art, is because our society is based on answers. It's not based on questions. We haven't lived long enough as a nation to come to that place where the three of us are coming to as individuals as we age, where the answers don't matter so much anymore. It's not that I need to know who I am, I just need to wonder who I am. And that's enough, speaking for myself, of course. And the beauty of art is that comfort with not having to have an answer. And there aren't many people who can cope with that, who can deal with not knowing. Political system is very rigid and has all the answers, although they're all wrong. The religious systems have all the answers. I won't go further. The educational systems, we have all the answers. We know how to teach kids, but that's all wrong too. So even if the answers are wrong, we have a craving, in this society anyways, for someone to say, it's okay, this is the answer. You go on, now you can watch TV, because I got the answer, I got it covered over here. We know what's... And that's different, by the way, by science, than science. Science is a questioning too. We could go into that more, but I think science is an essential art.
But then isn't religion an essential art?
Your search for truth is an art. Having truth come at you and be dumped on you,
But
like
aren't you
like a trailer full of gravel is not art.
But if you specifically walk into that church, temple, synagogue on your own accord, not born into it, your parents don't make you go. If you're searching, questioning, that hey, I'm going to go to that Buddhist temple and see what this is all about. Your inner longing, questioning who you are as a person.
I would argue that art never provides answers. That it is encouraging you to ask more. And so it never satisfies. It can give you a sense of beauty and a sense of peace, but it never says, this is what it is.
I don't know, Piss Christ was pretty specific on what the answer was, and wasn't a lot of people didn't find it beautiful and gave that guy's answer to what he thought of.
Well, I don't know that it was specific. I'm not sure what that meant. I really don't. I mean, I think about that thing all the time because, and maybe there's the answer, because I'm so confused by it. Mm-hmm. And in some ways disturbed by it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't want to go into a museum and see a jar of piss. I mean, I'm more disturbed by that than having a crucifix in it. But I think that it works as art for the very reason that it's been in the public consciousness for so long and hasn't provided any answers at all.
Okay, then it's something like the Marx Brothers art.
Yeah.
They don't provide, I don't think they even ask a question. They're just there certain...
They confound your whole sense of reality.
Yeah, they do. They turn everything upside down.
That's what makes it funny.
And now the question is, so how do we live in an absurd world?
I think you're reading a little too much into it.
I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
What is your definition of art, Craig?
Well, we were talking about before we started recording. The Supreme Court Justice says about pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
I'm not talking about your own personal private art collection.
Nice. Yeah, I see you. I see you over there.
Good one, huh?
Okay, yeah.
You're waiting for that.
No, I just came up with that.
So I don't know what is art. I mean,
Listen,
I can go.
Groucho Marx hung out with people like T.S. Eliot. Mm-hmm. Groucho Marx loved great novelists.
Okay, I'm not saying he's not an awesome person or talented. I'm just saying.
But this, how can that? You can't. That can't help but permeate his work. And what he's created has endured in ways that other films from the 30s haven't. Mm-hmm. Right? His stuff, if you watch Duck Soup, that still works, where almost nothing else from the mid-30s works.
Right, I agree, but is he asking questions that dig deep into our soul?
Yes. Do you submit to authority or not? Is one of the primary questions the Marx Brothers ask. Do you acquiesce to follow the herd mentality? This is what makes them endure. Now, and maybe the opposite is the Three Stooges. I'm not so sure that they rise to that level.
But they're long-lasting, maybe even more popular than the Marx Brothers. So is that art?
This is my question.
Art's not defined by popularity,
No,
by the way.
no, I totally understand that. But
they have a more, I think, uncomplicated message than the Marx Brothers do. The Stooges aren't about resisting authority. The Stooges aren't about subverting political expressions. The Stooges are actually, three schmoes who are hapless, and they always end up on the short end of the stick.
just trying to make you laugh.
And the Marx Brothers never end up on the short end of the stick. And so in some ways, yeah, that's a more, I don't know. You sound like an asshole when you start to talk about these things in terms of, common denominator and the appeal to the proletariat and all of that business. But are the Stooges high art? No, I think the Marx Brothers are.
But when you read their biography, the Marx Brothers, and they're doing those movies, and it's always, okay, Chico gambled all his money away, we got to make another movie.
Yeah.
And,
We're not talking about them as human beings. There's no artist that is a perfect
But when they
human
go,
being.
no, I'm not saying, I have nothing, it has nothing to do with Chico and his money problems, it has to do with, they didn't set out to, hey, I want to write a story about subverting authority, because this whole...
That's it. That's exactly
They just say,
it.
crap, I need some money, let's
that's-
make a movie. And
that's
then we, 50 years later, say, well, look at what they're doing, they're
And that's
subverting
where,
authority.
that's where art comes from, though. See, this is the way they lived. They lived before they even, while they were still nobodies on, the Borscht Belt or vaudeville circuit, they were still living exactly the way they behaved in these movies. And I think that's Morgan's point, that this arises organically. This isn't a plan. I'm going to make this, and it's going to be great, and it will endure for
And it's going to change the world.
Yeah. I don't think art ever begins that way. Art begins with a very personal question, and perhaps a very personal awareness. If art tries to anticipate favor in the public eye, it will certainly fail, I think. And maybe it's not even about good or bad art. Maybe it's about strong art. Maybe it's a question of the art being strong as opposed to any kind of value judgment.
So it's maybe accidental art.
Accidental, I think it's inspired. You can find art, or you can live and generate it. My struggle is that I feel that I want to share what's going on inside, right? I think that's an essential human drive. But there's something saying, well, it's got to be this, or it's got to be this way, or it's got to make money, or it's got to appeal to this, or it's got to help these people, or it's... You can imagine the Marx Brothers didn't care about that. You can imagine that Michelangelo didn't care about that. They had such a fire. They had, I got to share this, I got to let this out. And it doesn't matter what other people think.
Because even Michelangelo, he was a hired gun. He had a big, huge production facility.
Well, we all have to eat.
Yeah, but someone would say, okay, I need a painting of my wife or my mistress, or I need a sculpture of this or that, and I'll pay you this much. He said, okay, go to town. And probably same with the Marx Brothers or other things. It's like there was they're hired, and somehow through that process of earning a living, they created amazing art. But then there's the unsung heroes of art who, just produce things because they have to. And I'm sure Michelangelo is like that, and probably the Marx Brothers. I mean, what else are those guys going to do but be funny?
Well, listen, I don't know. I think, I was at the Museum of Modern Art a couple of months ago, and I wandered over to where Van Gogh's painting of Starry Night is. And it's not a really big painting. And there were 40 people crowded around it. And that was the only place in the museum where there was a crowd of people, around a piece of art.
And same with the Louvre at the Mona Lisa. You can't see the thing.
Yeah.
And you walk around the other place and nobody's there.
And Van Gogh's paintings now, they sell for, $20 million and up, right, for a single painting. But Van Gogh himself, he had no idea that he was a great artist. He never sold a painting in his life except to his brother, who bought one basically for charitable reasons, because Vincent would have starved otherwise. And now I wonder sometimes, I mean, you can't, I can't anyway, I can't doubt Van Gogh's greatness. I mean, everything that I've ever seen in person gives me that feeling of encountering the sublime. But I can't help but think that he's so popular because his paintings sell for so much. You know, I think there are people who invest in art, and that essentially dilutes the entire idea of art.
So it's like the bestseller syndrome.
Yeah.
I read this book because it's the bestseller, not because it really means something to me.
It's that whole sellout mentality. It's like, well, now that you're popular, you've sold out, and you're not an artist anymore.
Well, I think that can happen, and it does happen, obviously. But I think that there are people who resist that too. I think that, and of course the artists who become hugely popular and don't sell out, then we call those guys jerks, you know, because they're not accessible and they don't tell us about their lives and they don't, you know, do like an infomercial about how to draw better.
I turn to nature again. Nature doesn't care what we think about it, but it offers that sublime, that aesthetic. And it doesn't sell out, and it doesn't change according to what we want it to be.
That's right. And that sublime is really demanding. That's really difficult. The sublime is sublime because it is in some sense disturbing. You know, the sublime, there's two things about the sublime. There's the magnitude of the sublime. This thing is so big I can't get my head around it, right? And then there's the dynamic of the sublime, that the force that it conveys is absolutely unopposable. It's absolutely overwhelming. And so those two things, the magnitude and the dynamic of the sublime are very disturbing to just normal consciousness.
Yes.
You know, it's disorganizing.
Right. It breaks the continuity. That's what the artist and the individual who seeks that, who craves that experience, that's what we're seeking. That's what we want to replicate. That's what we want to be. We want to be so in tune with our nature, just like nature is in tune with itself. You know, you go to a garden, a cultivated garden, and you see roses that are beautiful, even though they've been hybridized and sort of manufactured. They have an appeal that's deeper than that, all that effort that went into creating that visual and olfactory experience, because there's some underlying pure amazing thing in nature. And walking into an uncultivated, a wild area, you feel that, well, anything could happen. You could turn the corner and see a mountain lion. That's what's so exciting and discomforting about nature, and some people can't handle it. I think the language of art is important. I think as we become more and more separated from nature, the language of art is harder to convey, because we don't have the grammar to teach kids, you know, it's okay to wonder, it's okay to question, to not have an answer, to walk off the path in the forest, to get lost, and to find your way back. As an artist, I think this is really good. I think seeing art as, not even metaphorically, but really as a walk in your own wilderness.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and where the potential of death is a possibility.
And that's always see, there's another one of the disturbing things. Craig put his finger on it. That when we contemplate a work of art that allows us to have that experience of the sublime, or that seizure of the heart that Joyce talked about, there's a part of us that dies and is reborn and has a different sensibility after that experience.
Yes.
Right? And so there is that very real threat of death, or at least a psychological death, when we encounter a great piece of art.
So does real art have to be a little bit dangerous?
I think so.
Absolutely.
I do.
That's why we're still talking about Piss Christ, and
Yeah.
we get these calendars of the lovely scenes of nature and waterfalls and things and beaches, and like as Morgan was saying, you can turn a corner. This happens in the Grand Canyon all the time.
Yeah.
People don't understand
Right.
that, you know, it's 110 degrees and you're walking up this huge grade, and people die every year there because they don't understand. And
Every
so
year there's Germans that fall off the cliff,
There's a-
you know. Take one more
Yeah.
step back.
Yeah, there's
While I take a picture.
it's a big book.
Oh yeah,
About
that guy
the
came out.
Death in the Grand Canyon. The guy just wrote about every person who's died in the Grand Canyon, either falling off the ledge or, you know, whatever. So there is.
And they're
that
not mountain
possibility.
climbers. They're not all mountain climbers. They're not all super athletes. They're just
There's
People made
model taking a photo shoot, sitting on the edge, and the ranger say, "Hey, you might be low," and she rolled off and done. So it's
And there's great mysteries in there. Do you guys know Brad Dimmick? He's a local author, and he's been a river guide for decades. He's our age, and he's written several books about the Grand Canyon and the river specifically, and some of the great mysteries, like this married couple on their honeymoon.
Oh, yeah.
Just
Right.
disappeared. And so he's done all this legwork and all this research. And man, if any of you are listening and are fascinated with the Grand Canyon, read Brad's books. His name is Brad Dimmick. You can get him from Amazon. Or if you run into Brad on the street, ask him for one.
You know a title of one?
It's escaping me right now.
Brad, probably just.
Let me look while you guys talk.
Okay.
talk, Craig, quick.
Okay. One thing that I thought was pretty cool that's happened within the last, well, I guess since the late 70s maybe, poetry seems to have come back into, if not vogue, at least there's a rising culture. Poetry slams became very popular in the 90s, but I think a lot of it had to do with rap. And like it, don't like it, there's a certain art form to stringing these words together, whether they rhyme or don't rhyme, but there's a meaning behind it, and a lot of the kind of nasty stuff gets the attention in the news and parents groups and whatever. But here are kids who have maybe crappy education, live in a big, huge city with maybe not a whole lot of hope, and they're writing about it. And maybe they're even right. They might be coming off the top of their heads with it. There's actually contests about that, who can just spontaneously come up with something. And, it was...
That's a good point. The more immediate some things are, the more vulnerable they are, the more authentic they can be.
But it's also like, it kind of reminded me of that, I'm sure there's a term for it, but the Zen monks who create the works of art with the sand, I think, and then the instant they're done, they wipe it clean.
Right.
It's like, more than likely in these contests, the rap contests, I'm sure there's a term for that too, no one's recording this probably. So you're going to say your piece, do your poetry, and it'll probably be gone.
Yes.
Hopefully you remember it, but a couple hours later, you're going to go home and write it down, probably not.
That's another
it's
thing that we don't have comfort with, which is letting things be gone. That's another thing that an ancient culture must reckon with, is that, okay, most of our culture is gone, has been destroyed through war and disaster and disease and everything else. Where in America, we're still holding on to this piece of parchment. And if we lost that, maybe all of America would be gone. We're young enough that we have an attic full of all of our history. Last week, a couple of weeks ago, I was under threat of evacuation because of a forest fire in my neighborhood, and it was a great exercise in letting go, because you know what? Even if like one of my neighbors got a U-Haul truck and started loading everything that he owned into a truck. Why? I have my family, I have a couple of things, And obviously, of course, I'm glad that it didn't happen. I'm glad that we didn't have to evacuate. I'm glad the neighborhood didn't burn down. I'm glad that I still have all my stuff. But at the same time, you know, I would have been okay. I would have, you guys don't know this, but my house burned down many years ago in another community. And we lost everything. And I'm still here. Mm-hmm. So it's back to your original statement of, you know, is the youth of the United States giving us more to deal with as far as art, more difficulty with art? I think it is, because we're not comfortable with question. We're not comfortable with loss. We're not comfortable with just not knowing. More ancient cultures are, or older cultures are, more comfortable with that because they've made it through more.
I remember there was a award ceremony, rock and roll award ceremony. I think it was in the '80s, and you know, rap was just getting popular. And somebody got up there, and somebody kind of popular got up there and started kind of ragging on rap and how it's not music and it's not art or whatever. And then I remember Pete Townsend, the songwriter for The Who, guitar player for The Who, got up there. He received his award, and he came up there and he said, you know, about rap, it's not our place to judge it, it's our place to get out of the way. You know, we had our time, and the adults didn't like our music at all. Of course, we're not going to like the music of our kids and grandkids, and so it's not our place. We have to get out of the way. You know, there's a group that took it, an art form, smashing their instruments, at least at the beginning when they're just starting out, and took that whole rock concert experience to a different level. But it seems that art is just an expression of who you are. You know?
You have to get out of the way of art. Yeah. That's true. You have to allow the jars of urine to exist so that what someone else thinks is art can exist too. Mm-hmm. That's what we're not. That's what we're not comfortable with. We like our manicured gardens. We're not comfortable with nature. I mean, even the forest fire, even the fire that we faced a few weeks ago, is art. You know.
Sure. I remember a friend of mine, great photographer, which unfortunately he never really pursued. But I saw some of his, you know, he did a week's worth of just, you know, going out and walking around the neighborhood and taking some photographs. And he took a photograph of some black trash bags. Just somebody had piled up, had done some leaves or something. And all it was trash bags. So you kind of saw this weird wrinkling of I don't know what the hell trash bags are made of, the plastic stuff. And it was just so beautiful, weird, and strange. And I would just stare at it, just the different, it was black and white. And to this day, that was 1986, 1987, and I still remember that photograph of trash bags.
It's like that scene in American Beauty.
Yeah.
Like
the
plastic bag just caught in an eddy of wind going around and around in circles. And it was so, you know, transfixing. It was such a powerful image. I think that's the image that sticks with most people from that movie. Mm-hmm. So let me just say this. I found the Brad Dimmick books. And Brad's a brilliant guy and a marvelous, wonderful man. The book I was talking about is Sunk Without a Sound, The Tragic Colorado River Honeymoon of Glenn and Bessie Hyde. He's got another one called The Very Hard Way, Bert Loper and the Colorado River. And The Doing of the Thing, The Brief, Brilliant Whitewater Career of Buzz Holstrom. And these are all guys back in the day, you know, the 30s.
Yeah. Well, the Glenn and Bessie Hyde, isn't that the one where they found the boat and then a little bit later they found a dude with a bullet hole in his head and then she maybe lived or did not live?
It's a great story.
Yeah, it is a really cool story.
Brad's a great writer. He writes really well and is very engaging and it's good stuff.
He's the kind of guy that lives his life as art.
Yeah. Well, now there's the question, right? Mm-hmm. This is something that the philosopher Michel Foucault said, that we consider furniture art. Mm-hmm. You know, we consider textiles art.
Frank Lloyd Wright, we consider our house art.
Yeah. Why don't we think of our lives as art? Why don't we make our lives art?
Yes.
And what would that do if we brought that thought to living? Now, I think that the three of us, and one of the reasons we're friends is because we think this way, but we try to do that, I think, in our own ways.
Well, I think life can be really repetitive and mundane. That's why we seek out art, why we go to nature, why we go see a Marx Brothers movie, why we go to a museum, why we may paint ourselves or write or do whatever, is because life itself is so god-awful, same day after day.
Well, it's full of answers, isn't it?
And
you wake up and you know what you're going to do.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to go to work.
And that's
somebody's going to tell me what to do all day long.
And so you seek something that may be a little dangerous, whether it's in the music you listen to, or the movies you watch, or the paintings you want to go see. To get a little intensity.
We want familiarity. We want comfort. We want things that are not surprising, and then on the other end, we want to live this exciting
So
life.
you see somebody like Hemingway, where if he's not writing, he's drinking, getting in a fight, and running with the bulls. You say there's a life of art, or Picasso, or whoever, and it might not be a gorgeous life, but it's like that was a life.
Picasso's life I might want. I don't think I'd want Hemingway's life. But I think too that what we're talking about here is that experience of catharsis. That art gives us a way to feel overwhelming emotions without being in too great of danger, right? I can read Blake's poem about the tiger, 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 burning bright, and have an aesthetic, sometimes cathartic experience, but it's very different than to be wandering around in some South Asian jungle and encounter the tiger there. Right? Not catharsis there.
We want to jump out of the airplane with the parachute.
Right.
Not just jump out of the airplane, which would be the same, right? Except for the end.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that's how we can live vicariously through these other people. You go see the action movie and think that would be awesome to do that thing that guy just did.
Yeah. That's a razor's edge, though. Vicarious versus actual.
Well, again, it's just like our lives are set, not our lives, but for a lot of people, their lives are mundane, they're boring, it's same old, day after day. Now on Friday night I get to go see a movie or go see a concert or something.
But I think that art gives you the feeling of catharsis, which is a genuine feeling. It's a genuine in the moment feeling. It's not, what was the word that you used? It's not a...
Catharsis?
No.
Vicarious?
Yeah, catharsis is not vicarious. Catharsis is very direct.
Right.
The vicarious experience is something quite different. You're still removed and distant, and which is why you can think it would be cool to have an Uzi in a restaurant or something, and just paint the place red.
Right.
But the actual experience is awful. It's horrible. It's sublime. So catharsis is a real in-the-moment thing. I think a vicarious experience of something doesn't
satisfy the same level.
Yeah, exactly.
I think art allows you to be an artist.
Yeah.
In many ways, it gives you that entry.
Which finally is about seeing the world in a different way, right? Than a kind of mundane, prosaic.
Yes.
Yeah, but you see it in a way that you like.
Not necessarily.
I mean,
no, not necessarily.
Because you're going to say, hey, look at this great painting, listen to this great song. I'm saying, that doesn't interest me. I don't like it. I like my stuff, and I share it with you, and you're like, whatever. I'm not into that.
Yeah, you're talking about resonant. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
You want it to resonate.
Powerful art, really, really, really powerful art that we've been talking about. Whatever you want to call it, great art, strong art, whatever. It encourages us to, forsake the easy pleasures for the harder ones. And so listening to the Archies sing Sugar, Sugar, kind of an easy pleasure. Listening to Leonard Cohen sing Suzanne is a harder pleasure. And I think there's a qualitative difference there that's relatively easy to, point out or experience. Part of the problem, I think, that we've got in our culture right now is that we like these easy pleasures. We like being comfortable. We don't like being disturbed. and therefore everything is infirm as a result. Everything suffers as a result. It's like those kingdoms in mythologies where the king is sick and the crops won't grow and the children are stillborn and women are widowed and all of that business. And there's a malaise that we're actually encouraging in this country because we're refusing to acknowledge the importance of art in daily life.
Well, I think it's there. I mean, especially when you talk about the freeway story, and even you drive down there now, and I've seen this in some other big cities. They're trying to do things with the freeway. Down in Phoenix, there's geckos, and these really cool-looking geckos that they've carved into the thing, and doing things with landscape art. At least tries to make life a little more pleasurable as you're sitting in rush hour traffic.
Yeah, but pleasure is not it. Pleasure is not it. Think about the predominant art form, which is, America's got to be movies, right? Mm-hmm. Get into the room, and from the beginning to the end, they're holding your hand and telling you what to think about the main character and about, there might be some twists and turns, but it's all sewn up at the end. That's not art. While there is an enormous amount of craftsmanship involved, and those who produce and help produce movies, they may be artists, but the completed piece rarely makes you go, wow, that really, what does that mean? Like this bunch of superhero type movies lately. There's no question about, they don't make you question your sense of reality in it. It's just, pornography.
Right.
It really is.
Yeah, but it's an interesting difference in the superheroes of today than we had back, that were back in the 50s and 60s. Superman was a straight-laced, patriotic superhero who did good. You look at the superheroes today, the Avengers, the X-Men, Batman, there are very flawed individuals.
It's the same drug, though. Are you saying that George Reeves was more...
I don't know if they had anything to do with George Reeves. Who
committed suicide, by the way.
That's right. Great movie about that, Hollywoodland.
Yeah.
Great movie. Great movie.
Not art, but great.
No, I think it's very... Well, here's the thing with movie. You said the thing about movie, and I want to mention this before we get back to superheroes, but I was thinking about the movie Gravity. And it's a space movie with Sandra Bullock and George Clooney. Big, huge budget. This thing has got to make some money, so they're going to make a big action flick out of it. But remember this one scene, I'm not giving anything away, but there's one scene where she goes through this harrowing adventure, and it's about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes into the movie. She gets into a space capsule, rips off her spacesuit, and she just hangs there in a fetal position. And it looks very womb-like in this capsule, and she's just kind of curled up in this fetal position, hanging there. And he holds that shot for a little too long. Considering how fast the cuts have been up until that point, because it's a big action movie, and he holds this thing, and you're just staring at her, just sitting there. Nothing's going on. It's just one long shot of her sitting there, and I thought, that is really beautiful. It's very mechanical-looking, sterile environment, yet all she's gone through, and she's just wants to go back into the way. We can just... You can sit there and discuss, what he was meaning through that. But I was just thinking, here's his little, I don't know if he was trying to give a finger to the movie studio or something, but here's my putting art into this big, huge budget movie, which does take, like you say, some amazing amount of craftsmanship. But he's going to stick this piece of art, this scene that he holds for maybe 10, 20, it doesn't sound long, but 10, 20 seconds longer than he probably should have. Just to make people watch it,
right?
And maybe get something out of it.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm not really drawn to it, but I understand it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But I think this is how we discover art in our own lives. It's not a constant state of being. It's a moment, and our attention is grabbed by this experience in this particular moment. and we recognize that there is something sublime happening, which doesn't mean great or pleasurable necessarily.
Or even beautiful.
Yeah, but we're seized by it, and we're fine with just letting it be what it is. We don't have to own it or go out and buy some facsimile of it or anything like that, which would be pornography, as you were
But
pointing out.
it seems like sometimes, though, we are drawn to the things that maybe we don't like.
Yes.
And there was this...
because there's a harder pleasure.
Listening to this podcast the other day, and they bring up issues that a lot of people argue about and disagree with, and sometimes people get heated in their comments on Facebook and YouTube, and they have to ban people, and they keep saying, okay, let's keep it civil. Things get heated and people end up getting banned, and this one guy got banned, so he went to a Spreaker and started leaving a comment there, and his first sentence, and they read this on the podcast because they thought it was funny, he says, I got banned from Facebook, but I had to come to Spreaker to leave a comment because I just can't stop listening to your show. I'm so addicted, but you make me so mad. And I remember there's and they were talking about this movie, Howard Stern movie, Private Parts, that came out 80s, I guess, or maybe 90s. And there's a scene in that movie where they're having a production meeting, and the management is saying, okay, well, the people who like your show listen an average of 22 minutes. The people who don't like your show listen an hour and a half. And it's this all, and so we're often seemingly attracted to things that we think we don't like. You think if you don't like it, you wouldn't spend your time on it.
Yeah.
Well, like you said in the beginning, you said for some reason that America was in survival mode. I think America is the absolute opposite of survival mode. I think it's, well, what do we do with all our free time mode? And the human being is driven to find new territory, driven to expand their experience and their consciousness, and so they listen to things they don't like. They view art that they don't appreciate. They learn about wars and religions that they can't stand, but they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to make their lives and their selves better through that. They just commiserate about it.
Well, but they're listening to that stuff. They're trying to understand the different religions and the different countries and different cultures because they feel threatened. You find that show that you're listening to and you hate it, you find it a threat. I don't listen to certain kinds of music. I just doesn't interest me.
Sure.
It does nothing for me.
Sure.
So, and I'm sure other people like that, but yet there has to be a reason why you're going after this kind of politics, this kind of religion, this kind of art, because you feel threatened by it. If you didn't care for it, it's like, you're going to ignore it. But you feel threatened. It threatens your existence. It threatens your way of being, your way of life.
It threatens your set of answers.
This whole thing with the piss Christ. Forget what it means, but it's like you find that a threat.
Really, it's all about fear. I mean, political talk radio in this country anyway is all fear-based because there aren't any substantive discussions that happen. What happens is, a lot of name-calling and a lot of posturing and a lot of race-baiting and gender war and all of that kind of stuff. I think that people listen to that because they feel powerless, and these bullies on the air that they identify with make them feel powerful. And I think
the paradox is that they're listening to powerless people talk about a powerless system.
Yes, but there are shows, or were at one point, where they discussed the issues. Nobody listened.
The issues are irrelevant. It's all a bunch of crap.
It's not crap. I mean, you have to sit there and discuss, are we going to fund Piss Christ or not? Are we going to put art back into the schools, give the kids recess and take the Coke machines and candy machines out of the school? I mean, it has to be discussed.
But the real battle is not between these opposing political views. The battle is between people who understand the world literally and people who understand the world metaphorically.
The right brain and the left brain.
That distinction isn't as great as it was once thought, and there's a lot of interaction going on with right and left brain.
Except for Craig.
Yeah, I thought I was making a cool point.
But the idea of metaphor now, you see, if you take things and you say this you take that literally, that tapestry you got hanging on your wall, and you say there, geez, why is that hanging on the wall? Because shouldn't that be on my bed? Because it's really got only one literal purpose, which is to keep me warm.
Right.
And you have that rug hanging on your wall.
But if you look at it metaphorically, then you start to see into it and through it a little bit more. And this is one of the great gifts, I think, that art brings us. It lets us see through, it lets us see into and through the world as it presents itself to us. And we're able to find some deeper resonance and connection to the world and to other people. Metaphor always contains, and it's inescapable, I think, whether you're conscious of it or not, metaphor always contains this longing for a larger self, right? For a greater self, for those farther shores and all of that stuff. One of you guys mentioned inspiration a while ago, and that's sort of the foundation for that inspiration. It's that longing that metaphor necessarily inspires, and almost all works of art are metaphorical. There's something in it speaking to us that is more than just the art itself. Some people disagree and have really compelling arguments. Goethe, for instance, the great German playwright, poet, novelist, he said that, for instance, Greek statuary, he said that isn't representing anything. It's not representing the god. It's not a metaphor at all. It is, in fact, exactly what that force or energy would be if it had the ability to incarnate in some plastic form. So it's not a representation at all. It is the thing itself, right? Which is a really interesting idea. That this isn't an image of Zeus. This is what Zeus would be if Zeus could incarnate in marble.
Okay, but then you look at somebody, who's the guy that does the drip paintings? Pollock?
Yeah.
What was his first name?
Jackson
Pollock. Oh, God. Okay, Jackson Pollock.
Oh, listen,
Representative of anything.
those are, I have to tell you, I used to think, that's all bullshit, that drip art, I can do that, my 3-year-old daughter can do that. Until, again, at the Museum of Modern Art a couple of months ago, I stood in front of one that was larger than that wall. There is something about the personal encounter with that completely transcends any visual representation I've ever seen, any photograph or anything in a book. Actually standing in front of the thing, it was incredible. I mean, I had a moment of vertigo, like I was going to fall into the thing. And I can't tell you what was amazing about it. I can't tell you what was extraordinary about it. But I can tell you that it was.
That's perfect.
Extraordinary.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
If you want a great discussion about art, there's a really amazing movie called Who the Bleep is Jackson Pollock. And it's about this, I forget where they lived, but I think it was like nowhere, Kansas or something. And this woman truck driver, probably in her 50s at the time this really happened, had a friend who lived in a trailer park who was very sick. So she's at the Goodwill one day and she sees this huge painting, drip painting. And she, as a joke, she's going to buy it for a friend to cheer her up. $7. Talk the Goodwill person down to $5. Grabs this huge, 20 by 30 thing, gets it over to a friend's house. It can't fit into the trailer. It's so big. And the woman's like, this is the most god-awful, ugly thing I've ever seen. And so the truck driver later brings it back to her house. It's just sitting in the garage. A friend comes over, looking at it, it's like, that looks like a Jackson Pollock. And she says, who the fuck is Jackson Pollock? The whole rest of the movie is her and these handful of people trying to prove that it's a Jackson Pollock and therefore be accepted by the hoity-toity people, art lover people who say it's not a Jackson Pollock. How can you prove it? And the whole method by which you try to prove art is art and what is good art and what is bad art, and well, that certainly couldn't be, is fascinating.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And because of her background, she's a foul-mouthed, beer-drinking, cigarette-smoking, old lady truck driver. She can't possibly have art, know art, or have anything to do with art. And even though there's evidence to point that that is a Jackson Pollock, they will not recognize it. Mm-hmm. And because a lot of it, granted, has to do with the provenance. How the hell did it end up in Kansas or wherever, or Tennessee or wherever the hell they were? But I won't give away the ending, but there's evidence to show that this probably was a Jackson Pollock, and should be in a museum, and it's set at this lady's house.
And there again, I mean, the influence of money, and why is it now in this person's eyes no longer a piece of shit, right? That they wouldn't hang in their trailer. and after they find out, oh, it might be a Jackson Pollock, now it's something that's really extraordinary. Well, come on.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, and that's the thing. It's like this woman would not have it in her trailer. One, it couldn't fit, but it was so ugly, it couldn't have it. And yet, and I'll give a little bit of the ending, somebody offered her $100 million for it. And it's like,
did she sell it?
I'll give away.
What the hell is wrong with her? She should have sold it.
Hey,
She doesn't like it anyway. If somebody's going to give you $100 million.
But the thing is, it comes down to, and this is what's so amazing about the movie, it comes down to her demanding to be accepted. And the thing is that the artistic society will not accept her or her piece of art. And it was this private buyer who, it's supposed to be worth like, maybe 100 million, it was like 10 million or something. It's supposed to be worth like $35 million. Somebody offered her 10, she said no because she wants the 35. But it's not so much the money, it was the being accepted for who she is. Mm-hmm. She's not fancy. Mm-hmm. She doesn't drink wine, she doesn't have a fancy vocabulary. She has a $2 vocabulary, and she hangs out at the bar and smokes and plays bingo or whatever. And they will not accept her. And she wants that acceptance and that the respect.
Why would she want to be accepted by them?
Just gotta stick up her ass. It says,
I tell you, if I saw something like that Pollock I saw in MoMA, I would respond to that immediately. I would say, this is fabulous, I love this. And it's not because it's a Jackson Pollock. And so even if some, Herb Fritz painted this thing, I would still go, wow, that does something for me, and I'd want it. But if somebody came along and said, hey, I think that's a Jackson Pollock, I wouldn't all of a sudden be saying, and they gave me $10 million for it, I'd say hell yes. Even if I knew it was a Jackson Pollock, I'd still say hell yes, because the experience is not something you can possess.
but see, I would do that, Jackson. If I was at a garage sale and I saw this thing for $10, I would walk right by it. I said, does nothing for me, that kind of artwork. Yet if I knew that was a Jackson Pollock, I would want to possess it. Yeah, maybe that's pornography.
And now you turn art into pornography by doing that.
And it's like, just because it's Jackson Pollock. If it was the dude down the street, did the exact same art, almost precisely, I would not want it. But because this name is attached and there's a history of this guy behind it, now I want it.
And I think that degrades art.
Same with.
I don't think we have a choice, though. I mean, we want to be associated with what others have defined as.
No, I think that is absolutely how it is. I'm just saying I think that degrades art. I absolutely accept that's how it is.
Yeah.
Well, John Lennon and Yoko Ono did these avant-garde records in the late 60s, Two Virgins and some other things. Does not interest me at all. That kind of stuff. I'm sure there's a whole genre of different artists doing that kind of thing.
I really like the Imagine cover, though. I thought that was good art.
But I'm just saying, if I saw that record at a garage sale for $2, signed by John and Yoko, I would buy it. And not because I'm in love with the avant-garde music he's producing on that record, because it's John Lennon and Yoko, and they touched it because they signed it with their autographs. And again, it comes down to that, well, I'm not buying it for the art, I'm buying it because of the artist.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Yeah. Maybe I've turned it into pornography because I must possess it by having this thing touched by John Lennon, signed by John Lennon. I hate the music. I will never listen to it.
Yeah, infatuation is different than...
I will put it in plastic and put it in my safety deposit box or whatever and never look at it. But I have it. And that's where I think a lot of the interesting thing about art theft comes from.
Yeah.
Because you can never show it.
So when you walk into nature, or when you're walking along the beach, you might collect a shell, not because it Yeah, all the rocks and
I'm
shells
showing
and-
the gentleman my vast collection of rock and, well, it's not mine, it's my son and my
But-
wife's, but
But you collect it because that individual shell has some meaning to you. It's beautiful, and it has an association with the trip and with the experience.
Well, yeah, and-
You don't collect it because of the artist,
Right.
because there is no artist, and that's the genius of nature as art.
We bring that home because a piece of us is still there, and we bring that piece of it there home with us. It's sort of this exchange, right?
well, the thing with this, and what I'm finding with this, is it was the experience, and what I have buckets literally of rocks and shells that have been collected over the last 10 years. And I do a little bit, but it's mostly my wife and son. We were in Europe once, and my wife actually, we shipped home rocks from France. And but it's the experience of collecting the rocks. Once you have it here,
Yeah, now
I could get rid of these,
That's
and it would
meaningless,
take her
though.
a few months to realize they're gone. But it was the experience of collecting them, of wow, this is a beautiful rock, and the shape and the color, and it's like the Zen painting, the
Yeah.
Zen monks. It's like you could just put the rock down again and let somebody else enjoy it.
Exactly.
But it's like I must possess it. I must have it in my home, even though I will never look at it again. We have 20 years worth of rocks. Now I have a little thing that I collected, little yellow snail shells from France. I have it by my bedside. It reminds me of France. It reminds me of that time we had together. But now we have these buckets. I mean, there's rocks in that bucket that we will never see ever again until the house burns down, or we just my grandkids throw it away. But so it's like going. It gets into that possession thing.
Well, and I think it is about experience too. In some ways, it's somehow trying to preserve or capture this experience, which of course is impossible.
Yeah.
Right, and even when my daughter and I came to the Pine Forest 7th grade play a few weeks ago, right, there were parents there who were looking at the play
Yes.
through their cell phones or iPads and
Right.
things like that, recording it, right, and watch. And my thought was, why don't you just watch it? Because you're never going to watch this again on your phone.
And even if you do, so what?
Yeah. But there's an experience here right in front of you that you're mitigating or disrupting in some degree by having this device in front of your face.
Yeah.
And I found that to be, I was really struck by that for some reason. Maybe we need to do a show about acquisition or something. But
Yeah.
I got to go to the doctor.
Yeah.
I think we all got to go to the doctor.
I enjoyed this one, guys.
Yeah, I did too. Go see Who the Bleep is Jackson Pollock. What was
I
the
will.
books?
The books are by Brad Dimmick, Sunk Without a Sound.
If you just look up Sunk Without a Sound, you'll find all his stuff.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I say, live life as an artist. And
Make your lives a poem, as Nietzsche said.
nice.
Didn't he die of syphilis?
Oh, Jesus.
No, he didn't. I think he had some kind of, that's a nice, I think kind of the Victorian era's version of urban legends. But he did have some organic brain disease that sort of melted his brain inside his skull. So.
Nice.
All right, on that note. Are you really going to end on that?
No, not the syphilis thing. Nobody wants to hear about that.
Okay.
I get it. You can do a nice ending, man.